Ryan Carter was only 17 when his name became the center of Brookdale's most terrifying crime spree, a quiet high school junior by day and a masked carjacker by night, leaving an entire city gripped with fear as detectives raced to unmask the unlikely suspect. The city of Brookdale had always been known as a safe place to live, the kind of community where people left their porch lights on and trusted their neighbors. Families filled the parks on weekends, and downtown bustled with small businesses that closed early in the evenings. But in the fall of 2021, everything changed. A sudden series of violent carjackings shook the city in ways no one had expected. It began with a single report late one Friday night. A man was getting into his sedan after leaving the grocery store when a masked figure appeared out of the shadows, pointed a gun, and demanded the keys. The entire incident lasted less than a minute, and by the time police arrived, the victim's car was gone. The crime was alarming but not unheard of. Yet in the following days, the reports multiplied. Within 2 weeks, Brookdale had seen more than a dozen similar attacks. Each time, the target was an unsuspecting driver leaving a store, parking garage, or quiet side street. The descriptions from victims shared an unsettling pattern: a slim figure, dressed in dark clothes, with a gun in hand and movements that suggested both determination and recklessness. The carjackings happened quickly, with no hesitation, and the suspect always vanished before law enforcement could respond. Victims described the experience as terrifying, saying the attacker seemed desperate, unpredictable, and entirely unafraid. The impact on the city was immediate. Streets that had once been busy at night grew quiet. People who had never thought twice about running errands after work began rearranging their schedules to avoid being outside after dark. Parents warned their children not to linger in parking lots, and gas stations that used to stay open until midnight started closing earlier out of fear. What unsettled residents most was the randomness. There was no clear pattern in the choice of victims. Anyone behind the wheel could become a target. This sense of vulnerability spread through every neighborhood, leaving people on edge. Law enforcement was under immense pressure. City officials gave urgent press conferences promising swift action, but the crimes kept happening. Officers increased patrols, but the suspects' timing was unpredictable. The attacks were spread out, sometimes several in one night, other times days apart. The lack of consistency made it nearly impossible to predict where the next carjacking would take place. The police received hundreds of calls from anxious residents reporting everything from suspicious figures in hoodies to unfamiliar cars parked on their streets. Fear had transformed ordinary sights into potential threats. Local news stations covered the spree relentlessly, showing interviews with shaken victims and grainy footage of the suspect caught briefly on security cameras. The clips revealed only fragments: a shadow slipping into the driver's seat, the outline of a weapon, the blur of a stolen car speeding away. Reporters described the crimes as a reign of terror, emphasizing the youthfulness suggested by the suspect's movements. The idea that someone so young could cause such chaos added a chilling edge to the story. As the weeks went on, tension spread beyond the city limits. Suburban neighborhoods began locking their gates, and commuters traveling through Brookdale took detours to avoid high-risk areas. Even without a face to the suspect, the presence of this unknown figure haunted the city. Everyone knew another carjacking could happen at any moment, and that constant uncertainty was more frightening than the crimes themselves. Detectives working the case soon realized they were dealing with more than just random acts of violence. Each stolen vehicle told a story, and when they began piecing those stories together, a strange pattern emerged. Normally, carjackings were driven by money. Stolen cars were stripped for parts, resold to underground buyers, or used in other crimes before being destroyed. But in Brookdale, the cars weren't disappearing. They were reappearing, sometimes within hours, abandoned in alleys, empty parking lots, or dead-end streets only a few miles from where they had been stolen. Nothing inside them was touched. Wallets, phones, and personal belongings were left behind. The engines weren't dismantled, and the cars themselves were in perfect condition, aside from the hurried way they had been left behind. This was unusual, and it puzzled investigators. Whoever was committing these crimes wasn't interested in profit. Something else was driving them. The police went back through the reports carefully. Victims remembered the same things. The figure seemed slim, quick, and restless, moving with bursts of energy rather than the calm calculation of an experienced criminal. One victim described the suspect's hands trembling as they held the gun, while another noticed a slight hitch in the suspect's step as though nervous or unsteady. These small details suggested inexperience, and detectives began to suspect that they weren't dealing with a hardened adult criminal at all. The possibility that the city's most feared offender was actually a teenager unsettled even the most seasoned officers. To confirm their suspicions, investigators turned to security cameras. One grocery store captured a few seconds of the suspect running toward a victim's car. The footage was grainy and dark, but certain features stood out. The figure appeared lean, no taller than average, and the oversized hoodie seemed to hang loosely on a youthful frame. Another video from a gas station showed the suspect abandoning a stolen car, sprinting away with movements that looked awkward, almost clumsy, before disappearing into the night. Detectives noted the rhythm of the run, the bounce and the stride, traits that often belong to younger individuals. The press didn't know about these details yet, but rumors began spreading among the public. Some residents whispered that the carjacker was part of a dangerous gang. Others believed it was a group of criminals working together. Yet behind closed doors, investigators were narrowing their focus towards someone much younger and possibly acting alone. The thought was almost unbelievable. A teenager outsmarting police night after night, terrorizing an entire city while leaving barely a trace. The crimes worried detectives not just because of what happened, but why? If the thief wasn't after money, then what was the reason? Pointing a gun at strangers, stealing cars, and leaving them behind wasn't smart. It made police chase harder. The fact that the cars were never damaged or sold showed the crime was more about the thrill. Detectives began to think the person enjoyed the rush, someone who didn't care about what might happen next. That kind of thinking was dangerous and could grow worse. When they checked the stolen cars, they noticed strange signs. In some, the driver's seat was pulled very far forward, like the thief was small or young. In one case, the seat belt was twisted, as if the person didn't know how to buckle it in a hurry. These tiny signs gave detectives a clue. The suspect was young, maybe nervous, and hard to predict. That made it scarier. A shaky hand with a gun could end in disaster. Brookdale wasn't just dealing with a car thief. It was dealing with a strange puzzle. The suspect seemed less like a criminal and more like someone playing a game, one that put every driver in danger. Detectives chased every clue. Then, one night, a new discovery changed everything. Another stolen car was found in a quiet neighborhood. At first, it looked the same as before, nothing useful left behind. But then they spotted a soda bottle on the floor. It was still cold, fresh, and clearly not from the car's owner. In the back seat was something even bigger, a beat-up notebook filled with scribbles, class notes, and drawings. Inside the cover was a name, Ryan Carter. Ryan was only 17, a junior at Brookdale High. He had no record, no trouble with the law, nothing to make police look twice. Detectives were stunned. Could the masked carjacker really be just a teenager? The evidence said yes. When they checked his background, they found almost nothing. Teachers said he was quiet, polite, kept to himself. He wasn't great in school, but not failing either. Classmates remembered him sitting alone at lunch or doodling in notebooks. At home, he lived with his parents in a normal house, and neighbors said the family was private. Nothing pointed to violence, but deeper digging showed another side. On his social media, Ryan posted odd messages about taking rides and not being controlled. At the time, they seemed like teenage complaints, but now they looked like clues. His parents also admitted he had started sneaking out late at night. They thought he was just with friends. They never guessed he was out stealing cars with a gun. Detectives felt a chill. The boy who went unnoticed by day was turning into someone dangerous by night. The case had changed. The suspect wasn't just a shadow anymore. He had a name and a face, Ryan Carter, but why was he doing it? The difference between the polite student and the bold carjacker was so sharp that detectives began to wonder if they really knew him at all. Police planned carefully. If Ryan was really the carjacker, they needed proof. Officers set up watch near his home. Soon, they saw what they feared. On a cold night in late November, Ryan slipped out of his house with his hood pulled low. He carried nothing they could see, but he moved fast like he had a mission. Detectives followed quietly. Ryan walked through side streets until he reached a small store parking lot. He waited. When a lone driver came back to their car, Ryan moved quickly. From under his hoodie, he pulled a gun and forced the driver out. The scene unfolded exactly like the earlier reports. Within seconds, he slid into the driver's seat and sped off. The officers tailing him didn't immediately engage. They needed to catch him abandoning the car just as he had done so many times before. The chase continued silently through the city. Ryan drove erratically, weaving through side streets as if testing how far he could go. Finally, after several miles, he slowed and pulled into a deserted industrial area. There, he abandoned the car in a shadowy corner, leaving the engine still running. It was his routine, his signature move. This time, however, the police were ready. Units had already surrounded the area. When Ryan realized he was being closed in, he ran. He darted between warehouses, sprinting with the frantic energy of someone desperate to escape. Officers shouted commands, their footsteps echoing through the empty streets as they closed the gap. Ryan stumbled once but kept going, clutching the stolen gun in his hand. For a tense moment, it seemed like he might try to use it. The possibility sent a chill through the officers chasing him. They knew that one wrong move, one panicked decision, could turn the pursuit deadly. But Ryan never fired. Cornered in a narrow alley, he froze. The gun trembled in his grip, his chest rising and falling rapidly as officers surrounded him. With weapons drawn, they prepared for the worst. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Finally, Ryan dropped the gun to the ground. His shoulders slumped and his fight was over. Officers moved quickly, placing him in handcuffs as he stood in silence. Back at the station, the weight of what had just happened settled over everyone involved. They had caught the person responsible for the string of carjackings that had terrorized Brookdale. Yet the image of him sitting in the interrogation room was almost surreal. He wasn't the hardened criminal many expected. He was a 17-year-old high school student, still wearing the same hoodie he had been seen in on surveillance footage, looking younger than the crimes he had committed suggested. The city's mystery carjacker had finally been unmasked, and the truth was more unsettling than anyone had imagined. When investigators searched Ryan Carter's room after his arrest, they expected to find stolen goods, cash, or evidence of a larger network behind the spree. Instead, what they uncovered painted a far more disturbing picture. Hidden in drawers and stuffed beneath his mattress were dozens of scraps of paper covered in his handwriting. Some were rambling notes about wanting to escape the monotony of everyday life. Others described the thrill he felt when stealing cars, the rush of power that came from holding a gun, and how the silence of the streets at night made him feel untouchable. There were no references to money or gangs, no hints of outside influence. Everything pointed to a boy who was acting alone, motivated not by necessity but by a craving for adrenaline. The discovery of these writings shocked even the most hardened detectives. They showed a teenager struggling with feelings of invisibility, someone who felt overlooked in his daily life but found a twisted sense of identity in crime. He wrote about wanting control, about how stepping into a stolen car made him feel alive in ways nothing else could. The words were unsettling, not just because of their content, but because they revealed a deep disconnect between the quiet student his teachers described and the dangerous figure he had become in the streets. The community, once gripped by fear of the unknown suspect, now struggled to accept the reality of who he was. News outlets broadcast images of Ryan being led in handcuffs, his youthful face visible beneath the hood that had once concealed his identity. Parents in Brookdale were horrified that someone so young had been capable of causing so much chaos. Students at his high school were stunned, unable to reconcile the boy they saw in classrooms with the one who had terrified the city. For many, the realization was chilling. The threat had not come from a hardened stranger, but from someone who walked among them every day. As the case moved through the courts, prosecutors made the decision to charge Ryan as an adult. The seriousness of the crimes left little room for leniency. He faced counts of armed robbery, illegal possession of a firearm, and multiple charges connected to the carjackings. Legal experts debated whether his age should reduce his responsibility, but the danger he posed to the public made it impossible for the justice system to treat him lightly. The courtroom filled with reporters, each detail of his life dissected and analyzed as people searched for answers to how a teenager could unravel so drastically. The trial revealed no clear moment of corruption, no outside force that had pushed Ryan into crime. He hadn't been pressured by gangs, nor had he been driven by poverty. Instead, the evidence painted a portrait of a boy who chased thrills until the line between fantasy and reality disappeared. His own writings became some of the strongest testimony against him, showing his intentions and his awareness of the danger he created. When the verdict was announced, Ryan stood expressionless. He was sentenced 2 years in prison, his youth no longer a shield from the consequences of his actions. For the people of Brookdale, the arrest brought relief, but it also left behind an unsettling truth. The fear had ended, but the story of a teenager who turned the city upside down would not be forgotten. It served as a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are not distant or unfamiliar, but hidden in the faces we least expect.